Welcome to All Systems Ergo, a human factors and ergonomics podcast delving into the fascinating world of healthcare. My name is Fran Ives and I am a chartered human factors specialist. I'm naturally curious about people, and throughout this series I want to explore different areas of healthcare human factors and the people who work in this diverse discipline. So hi everyone and welcome to another episode of All Systems Ergo. My guest today is Paul Stretton and he has many strings to his bow. He's an academic, a trainer, author and speaker. He has a wealth of experience working in high-risk industries and is a specialist in applying complexity science and new views of safety to shape organisational culture and performance. Paul developed an interest in healthcare and works for the consultancy MedLed. And I'm really interested today in exploring how Paul's experience of other industries contributes to his healthcare work and what it's like to work for a consultancy and experience a variety of different healthcare organisations. So Paul, welcome.
Fran, welcome. Thank you very much. It's very nice to actually have an introduction. Normally I have to introduce myself to groups, and I may just clip that and use it for groups when I'm working, if you don't mind. That was very, very kind of you. Thank you very much.
Well, I was just going to ask then, is there anything that you would change about that introduction?
No, that's perfect. I might have it when I'm entering the kitchen at times, just as a grand entrance. So no, that was wonderful. Thank you very much.
I like that, having it as you enter rooms in your own home. Brilliant. So Paul, you've got a safety background and you've also spent time in education. Am I right in thinking that it was during this time in education that you first started to experience and understand safety 2 language?
Well, in a way, I think that's fair to say. So when I worked in education, I had the great fortune, predominantly in the West Midlands, actually, where you are, Fran, to work with various schools to enrich their curriculum. And so I worked with good schools that wanted to be outstanding and outstanding schools that wanted to work out how to maintain that and what was next. I got to work with some brilliant educationalists, wonderful children, and learned an awful lot within that process. And it was quite a change then when I went into safety, because the mindset was very, very different. So obviously in education, ideas around safety 2 didn't really exist, but I think it was when safety 2, the idea of that positive view of human contribution to systems and slightly a move away from failure avoidance, it was certainly more akin to what I would recognise in terms of the education sector that I worked in. And it's interesting that these days we talk about just and learning cultures. I worked in some of the best learning cultures in the UK for many, many years, but without a safety focus, if you like. And so in some ways I'm making my way back to that place in time. So I'm going in it's an interesting journey.
So you spent a lot of time in education. You've now entered into this human factors space. Was that a natural progression? How did you get from that point to where you are now?
It may not surprise you, friend, that there's probably no root cause within that. So was it a natural? In one regard, I don't consider it to be a transition at all. If there was a transition, it was probably very easy. But I suppose that might need a little bit of exploring and explaining as to why I kind of think that. And in education, really, it was all just about what was next and what's the next kind of improvement and how can we help and how can we support and be the best version of yourselves. So then when I went predominantly into construction, rail, large civil engineering projects, the way people were perceived, the way people were managed, the way people were communicated with was with a very different mindset, shall we say. But I don't think many people really set out when they're a little boy in Walsall running around the place to get into systems and risk management, although living in Walsall does also help have a degree of risk management at times, my experience at least. And but the reason why I do what I do and the reason why I'm passionate about doing what I do is because I recognise that there are lots of people doing these jobs on big, construction sites, for example, that are doing things that I couldn't do, that I wouldn't want to do. and the environment, the conditions, the culture that was around them that I thought wasn't what they deserved and wasn't conducive to them being the best version of themselves, which was my mindset coming from that educational background. And so I kind of want to go to bat for them, really, and I want to try and challenge the status quo, because I feel that they deserve better. And then going into healthcare, which was, like I say, accidental in one regard, it's the same kind of mindset, really, because when we talk about the interdependent goals of performance and well-being, the reason why I strongly believe that, and I'm really passionate about it, it's not, for me, my driver is not about the well-being of the medical staff per se, and I'm married to one, so in that regard I've got a vested interest. It's because it matters to the patients, and it matters to the people that are using the services that in the West Midlands, my family, the people that I grew up with, that don't have the voice, that don't have the advocacy, that don't have that opportunity that I do. Incredible privilege to try and influence the system in a very, very small way. So in that regard, I kind of just feel like I'm still kind of trying to help and support and improve for those people, even if it manifests in slightly different ways. So that's why I don't really feel like in some ways it's a transition. It's just it's a different part of my journey and my work. The reason why I ended up in healthcare was completely accidental.
Go on, tell us.
So very happy in my construction kind of environment, doing all these kind of things. But there was one day a few years ago where I think I just got a little bit jaded, a little bit tired, and I think I'd seen one slide on the Swiss cheese model too many. And I think we all probably get that at some point, and there was another iteration, another slide, and I was just like, we don't have the language, we don't have the methodology to really explain and understand and address complexity in the system. And I went on a little bit of a rant, and my wife said the fateful words, well, it's about time you put your money where your mouth is. And so that was what the sliding doors moment, really, whereby I had been working with ideas for a long period of time, and systemic variation and all these kind of things. And that's where the origination, or at least the start of actually writing the Lily Pond model, which came about. And then I was incredibly fortunate that I was able to share it with Chris Turner, Chris Turner. And Chris Turner emailed me back and said, I really like this. Have you sent it to Suzette? As if everybody's got Suzette Woodward on speed dial. And I said, well, no, Chris, I don't know. And he said, leave it with me. Right? How brilliant is that? He said, leave it with me. Next thing you know, Suzette had a copy of it and got back to me and really liked it. But she said, please, could you rewrite it for healthcare? Because I'd like to be able to use it in my work. And I was like, yeah, okay, let's do that. Incredibly humbled, incredibly touched by the whole interaction, really. And so that's why I rewrote the Lily Pond model for healthcare. And then Suzette was doing a webinar for the Q community and invited me to be part of that. And then one thing led to another, and now I have this wonderful life and opportunity talking to people such as yourselves, and that's it. So it was completely serendipitous that I ended up working in healthcare, but I'm very, very grateful that I have ended up here.
It does seem to capture people, doesn't it? It seems to really draw people in, and healthcare is a really complex place to work. No one says it's easy, but I have the real joy of talking to lots of HF specialist practitioners in healthcare, and there seems to be this passion inside them that I really see when I'm talking to them. They light up when they're talking about projects. And I feel very grateful that we have such a passionate bunch of people in healthcare. I just want to backtrack a little bit, because you've made reference to the Lily Pond model, and I just wondered if you could explain that a little bit for any of our listeners that aren't familiar.
Sure. So the Lily Pond model was, let's say, my counter, if you like, or what I consider to be the safety to complexity version of the Swiss cheese model. So the Swiss cheese model, I think, is incredibly important. I was trained on it. I would have begun in the safety world to see systems through the Swiss cheese model, and I think it's incredibly important work. But also, obviously it's been criticised, and if James Reason himself says it's time to retire the Swiss cheese model, I think we should listen to the author in that regard. So it is a systems view, but it's more akin for me in terms of that Taylorist cause and effect linear idea of systems, and also doesn't have anything really to say about safety too. Doesn't really say about how we succeed. It just has an idea, a metaphor about how failure occurs, and it's multifactorial, which I think is important. So the Lily Pond was to try and move away from that linear mindset, and so the conceptualization of a system as an intricate ecosystem, and a recognition that the outputs of the system, the lily pads, are not just the adverse events, our safety one world, our datexes and all of that, that actually the systems produce an overwhelming percentage of good or acceptable outcomes. And so that's the plan view, if you like, is like the Eric Hollnagel's normal distribution curve, and saying, well, actually, this is our system of performance, so how can we understand it? Then if you go down, the cross-sectional view is of an intricate ecosystem that now gives us an opportunity to explore the system at macro, meso, micro levels, the relationships between different specialties, an idea of mutualism, which I think is important when we're looking at just and learning cultures, the recognition that the external climate will also drive the internal climate as well. And so that was the abstraction, if you like, for what I wanted to try and convey to how can we start making sense of the complex nature of our work now, which is fundamentally different to the industrial legacy of, the Swiss cheese model and things like that.
And you said that when you sent it to Chris Turner from Civility Saves Lives and Suzette Woodward, it was Suzette that said, right, can you write this and communicate it for our healthcare staff? So did you need to make any changes to the model, or was it just simply the way that you described it and explained it to people? Were there any fundamental changes that needed to be made?
Not the model itself, no. It was the explanation and the language around it, because we still reach. It's a relatively straightforward example, really, of a complex adaptive system. So everything that I wanted to talk more broadly, because I don't think it's a healthcare model. It's a model that then can be applied to healthcare, and given the complexity within healthcare, it seems to resonate well with people that are working in healthcare. That it makes sense to them. It wasn't the model itself that changed. It was the explanation and the translation, I guess, to make it specific for healthcare.
So I guess when developing this, I've mentioned that you've got lots of experience in different industries, and one of the things that I really wanted to know was, how that experience across sort of construction, transportation, how that really impacts what you do and how you work in healthcare. And I suppose before you answer that, it's useful to sort of think, well, actually, it's probably helped to contribute to your thinking around the Lily Pond model, because you're able to pick bits and use your experiences to actually understand that this is something that actually can be used across lots of different industries. But in order to do that, you have to have that experience in industries in the first place. So I'm really interested to know sort of how all of that different experience sort of combines and helps you work in healthcare.
Well, that's a very good question. So I suppose in many regards, I was thinking like this before I realised this had anything to do with work. So the earliest I can trace back this kind of mindset, if you like, I was 8 years old.
Okay.
Well, I genuinely, if I need to, I could pluck the date out, but based as a football-obsessed Wolves fan, but watching the FA Cup semi-final. So watching sport, I'm watching sport in thinking about systems and variation and all of that, which well, that's just the way I understood it. That's what made sense to me. It was all like shapes and numbers and patterns, and that's what I saw. And so I was thinking in systems as a kid, and then I was interested in performance, like in education and excellence, and like I say, if anything, then getting into safety, it was just like everyone was talking a completely different language and seeing the world in a very different way to how I understood it. And then it was so refreshing when I came across ideas when safety differently and Eric Holnagel and safety 2 and all these kind of things that right, I'm not absolutely alone, and there are ways of understanding these things that are maybe synonymous and working with. So in terms of when I started working in healthcare, I was terrified. Is the honest truth, because everywhere you go, every room you're in a room of incredible serial overachievers that are so impressive, so brilliant, and like I feel incredibly humbled just to be working in and around these people, and I think, well, what have I got to offer? Because I've spent the last chunk of my life on, bridge building jobs and rail development and all these kind of things. And now I'm talking to someone who's like, a cardiothoracic surgeon. I don't know what that is. But my realization actually very quickly, thankfully, because everybody was very open and supportive and just like wonderful, was once we moved past the language, once we mastered some of the professional barriers, we're still just fundamentally understanding people. And people in systems working under pressure with trade-offs that they need to understand, that want to be the best version of themselves, but are often inhibited by the system. And whether that system is how you design a 1.6 billion pound bridge outside of Edinburgh, or whether that's how you build manage a hospital, it's the same processes really. It's just different language. So was really interesting, actually starting to try and peel away all these kind of things and saying, well, actually, maybe this cardiothoracic surgeon has more in common with the plasterer that I spoke to last month than we realise. Even looks very, very different. So it's just about people at work making decisions and trying to be successful. That's really what I see it as.
It's really interesting that you say you were terrified when you first went in healthcare, because do you know what? I was pretty terrified as well. I remember coming into healthcare, 20 years ago, and I'd come from the automotive industry and the nuclear industry. And do you know what? I found those quite terrifying as well. But there was something about healthcare, and I really did think long and hard about whether to take the job that I was offered, because I knew nothing about healthcare. And I had a conversation with the person who ended up being my manager before I took the job, and I was almost trying to talk myself out of this job when I was talking to her. She was a wonderful manager who gave me lots of reassurance, and I very quickly realized that actually I needed to flip the mindset of not knowing anything about healthcare being a disadvantage, and actually see it as being a real advantage. Because, and I've said this many, many times since, by not understanding cardiothoracic surgery or phlebotomy, I could legitimately go in and ask the questions that people who feel they should know what those processes were couldn't ask, because they might look a bit silly because they ought to know. And very quickly things started to fit into place, and that's not to say I'm an expert in all areas, because I learn every day in healthcare. Still continuously I'm going in and learning new things, but I have to remind myself sometimes that healthcare can feel quite a scary place for people who are new to the industry. But you made reference to healthcare being scary, yet you've worked on all sorts of other projects in industries such as construction, etc. Did you ever find those quite intimidating when you first set out?
No, I didn't, but I suppose this is your product of your environment, and I've been speaking to builders all my life because that's who I grew up in and around, and so that was comfortable. Like doctors existed on TV, and they didn't exist anywhere else, so it was completely alien to me. Really probably the first doctor I ever really spoke to was the person who's now my wife. In that regard. So it's outside of that, no. So that's, I think it was that lack of exposure to it. Whereas I didn't feel that unfamiliar with other industries. But I was interested when you were saying about obviously your background as well, from not being healthcare related. Do you share that sense of actually once you peel away or you understand the professional system, actually there are some translatable or transferable processes in place that do make a lot of sense to you.
Absolutely. I think I came into healthcare just feeling really anxious about the fact I didn't know healthcare. But I suppose two things. They're people, and human factors is all about people. So a lot of the work that you do is to build relationships with people, to observe people, to understand them, to talk to them. And you realize they are just people. But I also realized that whilst the nuclear industry was very different to healthcare, I'd had my new graduate years in the nuclear industry. And whilst I knew it wasn't the industry for me, I look back on that time as being a brilliant grounding in human factors. And there are so many things that I learnt in those 2 years that I still use in healthcare. And so I think that the two things really are to remember that people are people. That's what we study. That's what we do. That's what we're good at understanding and unpicking. But actually, doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you're a human factor specialist, there will be transferable skills, and a lot of what people are doing is they're working in a system, they're following processes, and they're working with people, equipment, tools, etc., and they're aiming for an outcome at the end of it. And it doesn't matter which industry you're in. You might use different tools, frameworks, etc., but it's maybe not, when you strip it back, as daunting as you immediately would think.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, and maybe that realization might enable other human factors people to get into healthcare as well. Because obviously there's a shortage of human factors experts, such as yourself, embedded in there. Like heavy industries or more traditional, like seem to people naturally gravitate towards. And I don't know whether some of that fear is one of the barriers as well. Obviously there's the other things too, but whether people feel able or equipped to apply their knowledge in healthcare.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you say that, because one of the things that I wanted to ask you is about the fact that you work in other industries still as well as healthcare, because most of the human factors specialists that I know in healthcare, not all of them by any means, but most of them have chosen to specialize in that industry. Now, that's either because I suppose they're people like me who came from a general ergonomics and human factors background, so weaved in and out of a couple of different industries and landed either by accident, like me, or by choice into healthcare and got sucked in and stayed there, and that passion is what keeps them there. Equally, there are people who have started their career in healthcare, maybe as a manual handling advisor, a physio, a nurse, and they've gone on to do some postgraduate study in human factors. And so they've changed career, but they've come back into and remained in healthcare. There's not many people, I don't think, I will, can be corrected if I'm wrong, but there's not many people, I don't think, like you, who work in healthcare, but also remain interested in and involved in other industries. And I wonder whether that's what we should be doing more of, is trying to encourage people to straddle industries, so that they are getting experience in healthcare, but also, experience in other industries as well. One of the things that I really try and encourage people to do who are coming into human factors from a healthcare perspective, from a healthcare background, coming in after doing that postgraduate study, is to do things like join the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors and go to some of the regional network groups, or some of the webinars or conferences that are not just healthcare focused. Because for me, whilst I've been in healthcare a long time, I'm still interested in what's happening in nuclear or in automotive, because I've had a foot in there for a time. And I don't just listen to, read, or attend healthcare conferences and subject matter webinars. But it can be it can feel quite alien and perhaps a little bit intimidating for those people who are healthcare through and through to actually think, do you know what, I can learn something from oil and gas, or I can learn something from transportation. Because it might seem so alien that actually, I can't do that. It's too hard. And it might well be the other way around, that those people in transportation and nuclear, etc., think, oh, healthcare's too complicated, I'm not going to bother.
Yeah, I suppose for me, if we go from different industries, the important thing is just to really understand the system that you're trying to explore at that time, because they are all different. And I do see sometimes within healthcare there's too much expectation that we can transplant ideas from other industries, and that doesn't work, because we not really understand the dynamics within healthcare, or that particular part of healthcare, where we try and, which is why we move away from that one size fits all approach. So if we're skilled and curious about the nature of the system, then there's no reason why we can't move across different industries and look at how they're managing risk, and there will be some things that translate nicely into certain pockets of healthcare. I mean, for me personally, one of the reasons why I work across a range of industries, well, it may be just because I have a lack of focus and I like to be busy in lots of different places. It may be that, but I like to keep as broad a view as possible. And for example, like, really impressive people like Steve Sharrock, who you had on your first season, he's a good example of somebody that works across a range of industries. So being that multidisciplinary approach, I think maybe enables us to have a bit of context or that benefits from. But I try, in terms of my learning, be as wide as possible and seek inspiration and learning whether that be high performance sports or physics or anything in between. If it may tell us something, or might be a pocket of curiosity that we can apply to understanding the systems that we're curious about. And that's where one of the things where I feel that the nature of complexity, I found a natural home, because complexity science came about a conference, if you like, between economics and physics. And on the surface, these two specialties have very, very little in common. But actually what they realized was that they were understanding systems in very similar ways. So actually, not only can we learn from other systems, I think we can learn from other specialties. And too often we look inwards too much, and instead of looking out and saying, well, actually, who else is really interested in these areas? So, if we're interested in decision making, well, that's where I did some work with and spoke to somebody at UK Sports who's interested in decision making under pressure in complex adaptive systems. That's what they do. They don't use that language, but that's what they're interested in. So you know more than me in this area. So what can you teach me? What language do you use? How do you understand these things? And now how can we bring this into a world of risk management that might give people, particularly people that are actively doing the work, not people like me that simply talk about it, but actually doing the work. Are we equipping them with the mental models, the skills, the framework, the language, whatever it is that makes sense of this ambiguous, complex, beautiful world that we're working in?
So it's about seeing beyond the language and actually looking a little bit deeper into what is it that people are doing. They might call it something different. They might refer to different terminology, but actually what they're doing is essentially what we're interested in. So what can we do to learn from that? And what can we teach them that may be useful to them in their industry?
Absolutely. And I think human factors, we talk about it being multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary kind of approach. I just really want to embrace that. Well, actually, let's be as curious as possible. Where do we think those boundaries are, and are they correct? Are there more things we can learn from other experts that at the moment we don't utilize? And certainly when in healthcare, the decision making under pressure is such a crucial part of success. Then let's really understand that.
So one thing I'm curious to explore is what it's like to work in a consultancy in healthcare. A lot of our human factors specialists in healthcare are sole practitioners who are embedded into an organisation. And I say a lot, that makes it sound like there are hundreds of them. We know that there's actually a very small number of these people. But those people who are embedded in an organisation, whilst they might feel lonely at times because they are that sole practitioner, if they are embedded in an organisation, they have the advantage of being known within an organisation. Over time, they build up relationships with people, and they build up trust, and people really start to understand what it is that that person does. You aren't embedded in a healthcare organisation. You work for a consultancy. So I'm interested to know, how do you gain that trust when you go into a healthcare organisation? How do you get that buy-in from people? Because you're moving from various different organisations. So you can bring learning, but you're not known within that particular organisation. Is that a challenge?
I think, as with most things, it's probably a challenge and a blessing. It depends on how it works. And so one of the big pieces of work that we tend to do with MedLed is, like, we'll call it a trainer program, but really it's about developing as in-house capacity to apply and embed human factors principles. Now, as a result, we're normally invited in. So and the organisation may not have somebody with your expertise, but they may do, but they might, somebody who might feel a little bit lonely. And they want a little bit more capacity because there's only one of you, there's only so many hours in the day, and we want to try and broaden out the impact. So how can we do that? So and we talk about co-creation, we talk about the importance of collaboration, and so, and though I do fully appreciate there will be some people that take a different view to this in terms of suitably qualified, experienced human factors practitioners, and I think that's absolutely important that we need that in there. But also there is that limited, there are only so many people. So how can we still make the change? How can we still support people? And so if there are people we involve with management roles or their clinical teams, and they want to enrich or further their practice by bringing in some of these human factors principles, then this is something that we can try and do. And so it's a broader, more sustainable capacity within an organisation. So, I mean, it's wonderful work. I love every group that we work with. And what's the best bit of it, though, is seeing people going away afterwards and genuinely changing the system, genuinely making improvements. And sometimes they can be very, very small improvements. Sometimes it can be significant cultural change attempts that they're doing. And so, that's in terms of how to engage with people, it's relatively easy because normally people want to engage, and they're after that. They're after that support, and they're after that guidance. And with a range of different organisations, we always say, well, you might actually, instead of talking to us, there's somebody else who's trying to solve a very similar problem elsewhere. We can connect you. We can create that network application, if not expertise such as yours, but that application and broaden that impact. So that's kind of what we do a lot of. And like I say, I'm not saying it's a perfect answer, but it does get, from what I see at least, change and improvements within their localities.
I think you make a really good point about it's not perfect to have these sort of communities. We'd love our healthcare organisations to have more than one human factors specialist. We'd love, I certainly would love there to be, someone looking at patient safety or system design, procurement, musculoskeletal health. You could employ a whole team of people in an organisation all looking at different things and never competing for work. But the reality is that's not going to happen. So how else do we do it? I don't think it's a case of saying, well, this is just as good as employing a team of human factors specialists. I think it's very much a case of that's not going to happen. So what can we do with what we've got? And I've certainly found over my years of healthcare that there were a number of people who actually, with some education and some knowledge and support and guidance from somebody who is qualified in human factors, can really grasp some basic concepts, and like you've said, actually go away and do some really brilliant work. Doesn't necessarily have to be that really, really complex work, but actually just doing some small, really solid, good changes in their own working environments is a really positive thing for them to do. And I've had loads of conversations with people who very naturally thought about systems and approach projects in that systems way from instinct, really, but not known that what they were doing was a sort of version of human factors. And when they've heard about what human factors is and learnt a little bit more, they've generally been pretty keen to develop that knowledge so they can put a framework or a model around what they're doing. And actually they want to do it more and they want to do it better.
Yeah, I think absolutely. So this is, and I'd agree with you, it's not about replacing or saying it's as good as, actually, how can we, for example, if you had, what you said about having conversations with people and maybe not knowing what it is, and you can like be that critical friend and ask the questions, but also if you've got that shared language maybe or perspective, then it makes the impact you can have a lot broader, a lot quicker, and a lot more efficient. So it's about multiplying rather than replacing is what way I would say it.
And when you go into these organisations to do sort of train the trainer, do you have any input into the way that trusts select who these people are? Or, you know, I'm curious to know how these people come to you and how they sort of make themselves known as somebody who might be really interested in learning more and making improvements in their organisation.
Yeah, so there's normally one or a couple of people that are maybe further down their human factors journey or patient safety journey, and they're interested and they're feeling maybe isolated or alone, or just very, very ambitious and thinking, I want a team to be able to implement the change. How can we do that as quickly as possible? And so we'll come in there. But in terms of then what that looks like, one thing that we try and work with the organisation about is trying to get the breadth and the depth of the organisation.
Right.
Within that, so which would map to ideas around complexity leadership and adaptive spaces, and like, so how can we leverage the network to maximize the effect, if you like. So there will be like a range of clinicians. There'll be members of the nursing teams. There will be managers. There'll be a broad range. We also normally try and do some support work with the senior leadership or the executive board, so that they understand these things. Otherwise, there's an inherent weakness with any of those changes, because if you're and we have this conversation quite a lot at the moment with the rollout of PSERF, and that move to systems thinking. But actually, what does that mean from an assurance point of view and from a governance point of view? Because we're used to a dashboard with a nice discrete number or a red, amber, green that gives me the answer. And now we're talking about ambiguous, contextual, localized ideas, and we can't now tell you if more means good or bad. And that becomes uncomfortable. So we need to make sure that people are also on that journey as well, so they're supported. Otherwise, we're not going to create that sustained change.
So if someone listening to this episode is that sort of lonely person, shall we say, or that very ambitious person in an organisation that thinks, do you know what, I need to find my tribe, I need to find who those people are, you know, what would your advice be on where they start?
Well, this is maybe timely, actually, in terms of tribe, because I feel that I somewhat accidentally found my tribe in healthcare through the Learning from Excellence community. And what I really recognised straight away was the genuine humility and curiosity that network created. And I know the app formerly known as Twitter is often weaponized and toxic and shares and match, but actually, and I feel that I've, even though the algorithm may have changed that a little bit, the network that I've curated around human factors and patient safety is a brilliant network of similar-minded people, or at least with enough similarities that means that you're moving in the same direction, and enough challenge that means that you're growing at the same time. So I think actually the network that I see in healthcare with an interest in patient safety and human factors and this area is more vibrant and more exciting and more progressive than anything I've found in any other industry.
Oh, interesting.
So maybe that's one of the reasons why I've gravitated towards healthcare, because that is where my tribe is. Maybe that's where that's, I don't know, but like I say, I think starting from the LFE community and then branching out from there, I think even though the healthcare and the NHS is such a monolith and such a huge organisation, actually in some I feel like a very, very small world. If anyone is listening to this that feels I'm going to go for optimistic, let's take a safety 2 approach. Let's be the optimistic person about what we can do to their systems. Then actually it's not too hard to find that network and find that tribe and find something and say, actually we can support you, or go and read this, or let's do this, because there's a lot more agency that I've seen in healthcare than there is elsewhere.
And you mentioned learning from excellence. Before we started recording, we were both getting slightly excited about the Learning from Excellence conference, which is coming up in November 2023. But there may be some people listening to this who are thinking, learning from excellence, that sounds interesting. I don't know what it is, but positivity tribe, what's Paul talking about? How would you describe learning from excellence?
So I suppose firstly, if I take one step, I think the Learning from Excellence community and everything that has grown out of the work from Adrian and Emma Plunkett's is, I think, such a brilliant example of how the people within healthcare can see the need and then create the change that they want to see. I think it's such a brilliant, and a light that obviously, because we talk LFE 5 with civility saves lives. So Chris Turner, who we mentioned as well, would be another person who's on a different but allied journey in that, with the importance of civility and language. So what is learning from excellence? So I feel like a conversation with Adrian would probably be more appropriate, and so apologies if I misappropriate any of your thoughts and desires and dreams and expectations within this. But essentially, as a counterpoint to the weaponized, often toxic, near misreporting Datex kind of system, saying, well, actually, if there's so much we can learn from that end of our performance, can we learn from the best of our performance as well? I think now, when we talk about learning from everyday work, but I think it was a way of saying, well, actually, let's not wait till we fail before we start trying to learn. And so what can we recognize? What can we capture? And let's, if it is excellence, let's recognize it, because it's important. Now, should we need a mechanism to raise morale in healthcare? No, we shouldn't. But we know where it is right now. We know where. So actually, if it helps in that regard, in terms of well-being and retention and all of that, then I think that is a positive in its own right. But actually, on our best of days, why were we fantastic? What was it about that? Because maybe we should do that some more. So if we can genuinely learn from the best as we can from the worst, then we can move our performance curve. And I suppose going all the way back to my conversation at the start around education, that's part of the thought process around education. We don't just wait until you'll fail before we try to do something and do some improvements. Because actually, what do you do with the brightest and the best? Well, we need to extend and we need to enrich, and we need to make that normal as well. So I think there's some sound educational basis, as well as some principles around safety 2 that Adrian took and has I think utilised to an incredible extent. And the Learn from Excellence community is a great community, and I'm very much looking forward to getting back on my old stomping ground in Birmingham and seeing a few people, because the last time I was down for Learning from Excellence was Learning from Excellence 3. And I had a very, very little 6-7 month old child with me at the conference. And as we were driving back up the M6, there was the dark clouds of a global pandemic pretty much following us up the M6 at the time. Yes. So there's been an awful lot of awful lot has happened since then at Ariel. So I think as I understand it, the focus for LFE5 is about hope. And I'm very, very excited about that because I think it is probably very appropriately, in terms of timing. And and it's a great opportunity for me to learn from brilliant people as well.
Absolutely. In the show notes, I'll put a link to Learning from Excellence for those people who have had their interest piqued. But Paul and I could probably talk for a long time about Learning from Excellence. What's a recent thing that you have done through your work that you've really been surprised by the results?
Right. I'm going to try and take a safety to approach and think about the things I was surprised about in a positive manner, rather than surprised in the negative. I suppose for me, so one of the things that I talk about a lot is the difference between success and winning. And so for me, the pleasant surprises are not about the big, transformational things or awards or anything like that, or publications. The things that I take a lot of pride of, that I'm surprised about, is maybe one conversation that you've had that you don't realize really made any real difference. Just one conversation that you're having in 1,000 during a week, talking to people about systems and safety, and then they see you either a week later or a month later or whatever it is, and they say, I did this differently because of this. This is what we did afterwards, and we changed the way we do this, and the results are huge. Or the results are positive. I'll just take any result that moves in that direction, and that's the rewarding aspect for me. So it's not necessarily about I'm surprised that we got that outcome because we put that in. It's the small little changes that we see from what I consider to be very normal work.
And I think that's really nice to reflect on, isn't it? Actually, those small changes all add up, don't they, to being quite powerful. And also it can help those people to feel incredibly empowered to continue to make those small changes.
Absolutely. And when we talk about change in the NHS, it can seem such an incredible tanker to turn that immediately people feel disenfranchised and it's impossible. So if they can see that they have that autonomy, they have that potential within what they do and what's within their sphere of control to influence, then performance is bottom up, it isn't top down. That's so if we get those things right, then actually we should be getting the performance that we're after. So all those little interactions, all those little changes, even if they're difficult to quantify or to measure or anything like that, it doesn't matter because it's still adding value. One organization changed the language that they use with debriefing to make it language around systems thinking and appropriate for a range of outcomes. Like, that's all they've done. It's just different words in a debriefing, but actually what they see, that's quite a significant change in the levels, the way the teams are interacting as a result and the way they're learning as a result. So it's those for me are the success points. Those are the pleasant surprises every time people say, well, this is what we're doing differently now.
And do you feel that those sorts of changes, those surprises, do you think that they're actually more sustainable than going in with a big bang, massive project, brilliant, we've done that? Do you think that people just kind of building up their confidence, making small changes, feeling, actually, that was worth it, I'll do that again? I feel that it's a more sort of sustainable way of building that change. I'm interested to know whether you think the same.
The honest answer is, Fran, that I don't know, and I wouldn't wish to denigrate anyone big projects and hopes and dreams in terms of like big systemic changes, because boy, I think the NHS has a lot of capacity for
Oh,
huge
absolutely. Yeah,
systemic
sure.
changes. Like I say, and things that affect performance, I think there are some huge things that need to be addressed, and I'm not just talking about the physical environment and the machinery and tools that people are using and the ergonomics within that, or like getting people paid properly.
Mhm.
Getting people paid on time with the correct tax code and all of that when they're rotating around different contracts has a huge impact, I think, in terms of how the system functions, people's well-being, people's ability to perform under pressure, recruitment and retention, all of these kind of things. So actually, when we talk about the system, actually, let's really talk about the system and what aspects can we improve. And I think there's lots of potential within the big system. But in terms of agency, let's also start small and say, well, let's build up your confidence, but let's look at, can we debrief in a more effective manner? Can we embrace sector 2 principles in the way we're looking at this? So if we can add value at that, if we think about the lily pond, if there's all those different components of the system, well, let's just understand it, let's be curious about it, and if we can positively impact upon it, then let's do so.
I'm going to ask you 2 last questions, and I'm probably going to put you on the spot here. But if there's too long a pause, then we can edit that out, Paul, and make it look really quick fire. So the first one is, what skills or qualities do you see in other people that you really admire and you'd like to develop in yourself?
Right. So I'll say that's a 2-part question.
Okay.
So what are the skills that I admire in people? There are so many and I recognize that I don't possess. I mean, a huge amount, because this is, like I said earlier, every room I'm in a room of incredible overachievers that have got incredible careers on their own, and I'm talking to 20 or 30 of them.
Yeah.
Their intelligence, their expertise, their passion is incredible. As you maybe already get, probably the ability to focus on things. Anytime I see someone that has the ability to focus on something, I'm like, well, I have a huge amount of admiration for you, because if I've got 2 plates spinning, I'm going to go and get the cutlery out, and I was going to start spinning a few more things. So the one thing that I really admire is people that actually, especially in a field where people are projecting their agenda, their ideas, their perspective, is anytime I come across people that actually practice what they preach. And so people can talk about being multidisciplinary and being curious and all those kind of things, but actually how many times do they ask questions? I recognize when people genuinely ask questions and genuinely show interest in other people's work and their perspective. And it's interesting how often actually there might be a disconnect between what people project and what I see, at least, which is why, and I mentioned earlier, 2 people that I have a huge amount of time and admiration for, not only because of their work, but because they practice what they preach, in terms of Chris Turner and Suzette Wood. There's no reason for either of these people to spend any time on me, to give me feedback, to engage with me on any level. And not only did they did so generously, honestly, fulsomely, and say, well, what can we do next? And so it's not just going around, for example, in Chris's example, talking about civility. It's living with civility and demonstrating civility. And I think when I recognize that integrity within people's actions, I have a huge amount of admiration for that. So it's something that I have reflected on a lot, and I would like to think that I try and demonstrate that. But you're only as good as your last action, I guess. So walking the talk would be probably the number one item.
That's a really good answer. A really good, solid thing to identify, seeing other people and aspire to developing in yourself as well. My last on the spot question is, who is the person that you admire most in the human factors world?
Okay. In the human factors world, well, this is I suppose firstly it depends on who the human factors world is, and depends on whether they identify as being in the human factors world, or so. I
Let's
don't know.
keep it in the broader sense.
Broadest possible. Well, I've mentioned two people, Suzanne, Chris, and Adrian, and so I suppose, like I say, that's my tribe, I guess. I think in terms of impact of people's work, every time I talk about varieties of human work with people, work is done and work is imagined, people just get it, and it's such beautiful, elegant, accessible language. So I think the work that Steve Sharp does around that, I think that's a great contribution to our world of work and understanding, because, like I say, I think when I hear people that, again, wouldn't be considered to be human factors experts, but they can talk about the difference between work is done and work is imagined. And so before you know it, they're beginning to see the world in a way in which is changing, their viewpoints a little bit. So I think as a piece of work and as an impact, I think, I probably don't get any points for originality in saying Steve, but I think it's right and it's appropriate. Obviously, you've got the work of Eric Holnagel as well would be very, very significant. And it's interesting that Safety 2 seems to have gained more traction in healthcare than other industries. I'm curious as to why. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist in other industries, but from what I see on my travels, the importance of migrating to that Safety 2 perspective is much greater in healthcare than other industries, and I'd be curious as to understanding maybe why that is. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
No, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? I suppose I feel like I may be a little bit out of the loop in other industries to really answer that one fully. And it's possibly a really good question for me to pose to my human factors colleagues in those other industries, to actually see what their viewpoint is on Safety 2, how familiar it is, and how they feel it fits into the work that they do. Because I'm not sure I can answer that question, but you've piqued my interest with it. That may well be a whole other podcast.
Well, if you're going to write anything, can we write it together?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Paul, not only have you given me in this episode a wealth of interesting thoughts, information about all of the fascinating work that you do, how all of the different experiences you've had have sort of tied together, your route from education through to different industries, through to healthcare. But you've also left me with some good questions that I can go and explore and maybe do another podcast on. But what you've also so wonderfully done is woven in work of other brilliant people as well. And it may be work that people who are listening to the podcast may not have come across before. So you've actually started to kind of hopefully encourage people to go off on all sorts of different explorations and tangents, and maybe find something that they weren't aware of. Maybe other people will listen to this and go and find their tribe as well. So I wanted to thank you for the brilliant conversation that we've had today. I could go on, but I'm quite aware that it's Friday night.
We can do a podcast at some point.
We should.
Maybe we could do that after LFE5. There could be a round table with everybody.
Oh, excellent! Yeah.
This is Zergo live.
Yeah, it could be carnage, but it sounds amazing. Well, I'm personally really looking forward to seeing you at Learning from Excellence 5. But until that time, thank you so much for our conversation, and I look forward to seeing you in person next month.
Thank you, Fran. Thank you for having me. Have a nice weekend, and I'll see you very soon.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.